This podcast is proudly sponsored by Gyro Drilling. They provide world-class drilling solutions for all types of projects. They specialise in auger, air core and RC drilling. Head to the team at Gyro Drilling for all your mining needs and see how they can help you with your upcoming project. Hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull Podcast. As this podcast grows, every subscriber helps. From those of you who watch this on YouTube or to those that listen on Spotify and Apple, every follower helps. If you do this one favour and hit follow on whatever platform you find us on, I promise I will continue to look and find fascinating people across the world and bring their perspectives to you. Thank you and enjoy this episode. So hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull Podcast. Joining me in the studio today is Brian Leedman, the chairman of the IPO. Apparently, by the time this comes out, they will have IPO'd, but BlinkLab. It's an exciting technology in the mental health scene, and we're going to unpack a lot of it because naturally it afflicts a lot of people across the world. But welcome to the show, Brian.
Ben, thanks for having me.
Let's talk a bit about your history, because when I was going through it, you've worked predominantly in the marketing, investor relations, but the healthcare biotech scene for countless years. I mean, if someone's never heard of you before, how do you best describe your history and origin story?
I think I am an entrepreneur, and I've founded or co-founded, this will be the 6th company on the ASX, all in healthcare. And I have a marketing background. I've done an MBA. WA as well, and a Bachelor of Economics. And I had a career in marketing, starting off at Challenge Bank. For some of your listeners might remember, Challenge Bank was acquired by Westpac in the late 90s. And I became a senior marketing manager there. And then when I finished my MBA, I quit the bank, joined Ernst & Young as their head of marketing in WA. And that was a wonderful 5-year stint. And then I left Ernst & Young and joined a biotech company called Cyvita Corporation, which was listed on the NASDAQ, Frankfurt and the ASX. And in their investor relations capacity, I travelled the world. I met so many investors and different biotech fund managers, and that was a real eye-opening experience until I eventually had the opportunity to start my own company and float that on the ASX and join the board, and I've been a company director ever since.
And then the opportunity with BlinkLab, how did that sort of opportunity emerge itself? Because we'll go through a bit of the history of that company, but how did you sort of become involved in that?
So Anton Yavarov, who's a co-founder of the company, he and I have actually floated 2 companies together. And I think Anton was particularly intrigued, being a PhD science guy, which I'm not. But he's, I think when ResApp first floated, and I think that was in July 2016, I think he was a little incredulous about this new phenomenon called digital healthcare. And he probably thought there was a bit of wanky wank in that because he's a scientist and he's interested in drugs and how they work and the process that it goes to bring them to market, which is a very long process. ResApp was unique because it was a digital healthcare play that used solely just on a smartphone. And in that case, it used signatures and the sound of a cough to diagnose respiratory disease on a smartphone. Now, you can imagine in 2016, that was pretty
innovative.
That was like it's Star Trek-y, really.
Yeah.
And the whole idea that a phone can do that, but actually just before we started this conversation, we were talking about our fathers both being doctors. And I remember coming home from a conference in Brisbane for Oz Biotech, and I was introduced to this technology, which I eventually called ResApp. And I told Dad about it, and he said, son, that doesn't sound so crazy. I was taught to diagnose respiratory disease with my ear in medical school. So that sort of got me into thinking, this could be a good thing. And, of course, ResApp turned into be a phenomenal success, being acquired by Pfizer in 2021. And then I think Anton was quite intrigued at this digital healthcare thing, which may in part have resulted in him investing in and then bringing BlinkLab to an ASX listing with me, which is happening on the 4th of April.
Yeah.
So digital healthcare, I think that is the most attractive new space for investors to look at. And there's a reason for that, because you're not dealing with drugs. You're dealing with an application on a smartphone. So principally, there is no safety risk with these products. you know, the only risk, I guess, is you could drop your phone on your big toe. But there is efficacy risk. It has to do what it claims it can do. But there's no safety risk. And when you look at drug companies, they have to go through years,
countless hurdles and countless trials,
and millions of dollars just getting it to a human trial.
Yeah.
Right, and then when you start, it's all about safety. And then once you finally get through your safety studies, then we start talking about efficacy. So it's a much longer and much more expensive route to commercial gains. Digital healthcare can have the same commercial gains, but in a much shorter time frame.
So if we're going down this path then of digital health apps, and we're seeing there's a lot more, I guess, acceptance of these sorts of applications and platforms, as you said, from a medical professional background, but also just from clients and patients that are needing it. So discussing what BlinkLab is and the roots of what it's trying to achieve, how do you describe that company?
So it's really an interesting new development. So it uses neurometric testing on a smartphone. So effectively, you look at your smartphone, you're thinking, well, it's got a screen, it's got a processor, it's got a forward-facing camera. How can you utilize the functionality of the phone to do something amazing from a medical diagnostic perspective? And so what BlinkLab is doing is it's principally using the screen to distract the patient who's looking at the screen and then giving them a stimulus. And the stimulus, in this case, is an audio stimulus that you're not expecting. Now, there's a thing called your listeners would be familiar with the knee reflex.
Yes, when you're banging someone and seeing how they're...
Yeah, and it's every single human being is going to, if you hit them right on the right spot on your knee, your knee's going to go like that.
It's forced the reaction.
Right? And that is a human response. There's also a thing called the facial reflex. And the facial reflex is where you don't expect something and like a noise, right? And then you would blink. Now, if it was, say, like a fire drill, let's say that the fire alarm's going off, on the first beep, you're not expecting it, everyone will blink.
There's a bit of a shock.
But by the second beep, maybe you blink, maybe you don't. By the third beep, no one's blinking. Okay, and that's a facial reflex. So what Princeton University did a trial on, and it was developed by our founder, Hank, who's actually from Amsterdam. He's a professor in psychiatry, and he had an interesting idea. What if you had a double beep, but it's milliseconds apart? So it sounds like one beep, but it's actually two. What would happen then? And what it turned out was that you had this situation where people would not blink because the audio processing in the brain recognizes that, albeit it sounds like two beeps, actually one. And that audio processing was unique to people who are, say, not autistic. Okay, what happens to an autistic person? Turns out they blink anyway. Now that's interesting. So how can you take that discovery and put that into a smartphone application? Because, as I said, you've got the forward-facing camera. It can capture your blink on your face. And it also knows the difference between the time that you blink versus when you actually got the stimulus. And so they went and did a large study where it's your machine learning AI, which is the hot new space, right? So they took that type of technology, applied it in the real world, in a 6,000 patient study, got their algorithms just right, and then they did a 270 patient study, which is quite a big study, with Princeton, and had sensitivity and specificity, which is essentially saying accuracy, of 85 and 84% respectively in diagnosing people with autism just on a smartphone.
Wow.
So then the idea came, well, how do we commercialize this idea? So the thought is, let's target children, because when you deal with children who have autism, typically they're diagnosed at the age of 5. And that's because there's a long process, firstly, to get to see the psychiatrist, then there's all the testing, there's questionnaires, there's score sheets, there's all this kind of stuff. And it takes a long time and it's very expensive. But my point, and I think I'm unique in saying this, is that these children who are ultimately diagnosed, say, with autism at the age of, say, 5, which is typical, they were actually autistic from birth. So their behavioural patterns have already largely been entrenched, and they're not good ones. Those are the patterns that cause concern by their parents. And so there's a saying in medicine, which is generally absolutely accepted, which is the earlier you can diagnose anybody with anything, the better clinical outcome for the patient. So in our study, we had children as young as 2 years old. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting. What if we can target that particular group, and then we can diagnose them much earlier, get them on the right treatment, and then before those behavioural patterns become entrenched in their little personalities, and also their neuronal connections in their brain, which are also forming at a massive rate at those ages, you can actually provide treatment at a point where it can make a real difference to these children's lives and also for their parents.
So then, focusing on the autism first, I mean, understanding how do you even figure out which clients, or not clients, potential children are worthy of using this device? Is it something that you go, once it's out there, everyone should potentially try it to find out if they have this potential, if they have autism, I should say? Or how do you sort of go about figuring out, how you actually bring this product to market?
Well, I mean, there has to be a demand for something. And when you're dealing with digital healthcare, we're talking about developments in technology that there isn't a ready market or audience for, because the product doesn't exist, right? So we're creating new technologies. And, we've seen things like iPhones and iPads, and, how do you know whether there's a market for it until you've developed it? But they know, they're thinking, wow, okay, this is pretty cool. I bet you to catch on. In the case of BlinkLab, the technology application, I guess, starts with the parents. They know their child. They know if there's something not quite right about them. And by the way, most of the time it turns out there's nothing wrong with the child. Okay, but in some cases there certainly is autism and or say ADHD. So it starts with the parent. This technology, and it needs to be very clear to your listeners as well, because I often get asked this question, is who's going to end up using it? Yeah. It's not going to be in the hands of consumers. Okay, the parents are not going to be the arbiters of using this technology once it's regulatory approved. It'll be in the hands of doctors. Okay. And that is very important if you want to get this thing regulatory approved, say by the FDA. They don't like Dr. Google. They don't want you diagnosing yourself with whatever application it is. But if it's in the hands of a doctor who's utilising it and the diagnosis goes to the doctor, who's then the one relaying the diagnosis, that's how you get things through the regulatory bodies for approval. So it will be, no doubt, concerns from the parents. Go and see a GP. The GP is not a specialist in neurometric testing. Psychiatrist is, but not the GP. So this becomes a tool for the GP to utilise the test, say, there are some concerns here. Obviously, it is regulatory approved to do what it claims it does. And then hopefully that diagnosis that we're giving is then confirmed by the psychiatrist. Yeah. And that makes the whole process much
accelerates
simpler.
it a lot quicker as well.
Now,
so then if autism and ADHD, I mean, from saying this in the simplest sense, will be available on Android and app stores, but you can't actually utilise or get into it without some form of, I guess, coupon or some sort of code that a doctor has. Is that going to be the way that, I guess, patients get access to the technology as well?
I mean, they'll have to I don't know exactly how it'll be used in that way because we're still obviously going through the development process, but I think that likely it will be that you have a concern, you see a doctor, the doctor says, there's this new testing that's available, authorise that download to the family. Remember, you don't have to be in the surgery to have this thing. You could be sitting on your couch. It'll be done, I guess, in that scenario through telemedicine, telehealth. And we've seen what happened in the telemedicine through COVID. That just took off, which was to great advantage for my former company, ResApp Health. So this one, again, I can see how it could be used in that scenario. They've got the app on the phone. They have the test for the child, all done from the comfort of their home, but the diagnosis goes to the doctor. Then the doctor determines what they want to do next.
Gotcha. And then if we're saying that, so you've got this blinking sort of technology, hence potentially the BlinkLab side of it, and it's predominantly looking at autism and ADHD. I mean, what are the stages to get that I guess, verification from health authorities like the FDA or the TGA in Australia to then proceed with those next steps?
Yeah, so like ResApp, there was a proof of concept. And that was done in the case of ResApp through University of Queensland. And they funded, actually with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who provided funding for this particular project, they did clinical trials. Now, that was not a regulatory study. We've done, similarly, I might add a much bigger trial than what ResApp had done previously at that point in time, but the trial that we will be doing will be a US FDA registration study done, and most importantly, in partnership with some very prestigious university hospitals in North America. Mm-hmm. And that is really important when it comes to not only from a regulatory perspective, in terms of getting regulatory approval, it's also important in terms of your final commercial outcome. Because I think, certainly in the case of ResApp, that the clinical trials that we did with some very prestigious hospitals in North America was the caveat to the ultimate attention that we got from Pfizer, who then acquired the company. So I want to make sure that BlinkLab does everything right to be attractive to that type of potential commercial outcome.
Company, yeah.
Yeah, because they want to make sure that these trials were done tickety-boo with prestigious hospitals in North America. And that's what we're setting ourselves up for BlinkLab. Whether that ultimately occurs or not, I can't make that call now. Yeah. But I want to make sure that we've got every opportunity to get that same outcome that my previous company shareholders received.
Well, that feeds into then the IPO sort of launch pad in a way, and by the time this comes out, it'll probably be a few days underway on the trading. But can you talk us through the prospectus and I mean what the funds that you guys are raising intend to be used for, or what's going through that whole process?
Well, I mean, these trials are not cheap. I mean, okay, it's a digital healthcare company, it's not a drug company. And what happens typically with drug companies, they'll do their IPO, they'll raise $5 or $10 million, and that money doesn't last that long.
No,
because the trials are really expensive, and they go back to the well and raise more money, and then they raise more money again, and that's a long process. And plus, you've got to keep your shareholders enthused about the company because
it's a lengthy process.
Yeah, you don't want to go back to the well too many times because then you have to tap new shareholders, and I've been there and done that.
No.
I like being able to deliver outcomes in a much shorter period of time. So the $7 million that we've raised, and can I tell you, according to the lead manager on the broking side, he said that was the fastest, most sought-after raise he'd ever been involved in. So this thing raised $7 million, and we opened and closed the book in a day. So that was exciting in itself.
Yeah.
So we're going to be using that money to start that FDA registration trial. I believe it's starting, I can't actually give you a specific date, but I know it's going to be in the second half, some point in the second half of this year, of this calendar year. And it'll be a year-long study. There'll be recruitment, there'll be results, there'll be partnerships with various hospitals, not just in the US, but also in Europe and possibly in Australia as well. So we're going to have a lot of news flows that's going to support our listing upon IPO. And ultimately, it's going to come to some binary event, and that will be the outcome of the trial. And we hope that we're able to replicate the results that we did in our non-FDA registration study, which is the one we've done to date with those great results. I'm very confident if we can achieve those level of results, then we will get FDA approval, and we will be the first neurometric measurement using only a smartphone to diagnose autism and ADHD in children as young as, say, 18 months to 2 years. That would be disruptive.
And a revolution in regards to mental health treatment and diagnosis. And from that point of view, I mean, that's a massive market in itself, but does it have parallels potentially to other mental health disorders? As we know, I can't imagine, maybe it can, but anxiety, depression, or schizophrenia and some of those other ranges,
Absolutely.
Can it be applied there as well?
Well, I mean, with the funds that we have, I want to make sure that we spend our money wisely and we're targeting the autism ADHD opportunity. But there are, as you point out, other applications in other neurological illnesses, which all come through that facial reflex and the analysis that's done on the smartphone. So the potential for expanding into those areas is tremendous, and we will and intend to go after those markets. And this is not a race in the sense of, but I do think we'll have a lot of news flow in a relatively short period of time. But yes, we are looking at those opportunities as well. I'm not saying for a moment that this is the only raise that we'll ever do.
Yeah.
But I like to think that if the share price performs well, as I've been a director of many companies, when the price goes up, then you're looking and going, what else could we do with the opportunities that are in front of us if the share price is going north? Shareholders don't particularly mind investing more money if the price heads north. So all these opportunities are things that we could explore if we choose to. And I cannot make a call about that right now, but I am excited about what we're focused on in our autism and ADHD, in that diagnosis and bringing that particular product to market. There is also the opportunity that big pharma or big tech. I mean, the fastest growing divisions in big pharma is digital healthcare.
I'm not surprised.
I know that from my experience with Pfizer. They told me that we're investing heavily in our digital healthcare division, of which we're ResApp slotted right in. But all the big pharmas are doing that. So this is a big growth opportunity that we're in. And then there's also Google Health, Apple Health. These are also the fastest growing divisions within those enormous companies.
Yeah.
So that is something, this is just the hot space. And I'll also say, just closing on that point, what's the hottest space in technology right now?
I'd say it's the AI trend and the digital learning.
AI, machine learning, that's the new space. And that's exactly what BlinkLab is. It's all about AI. It's all about machine learning. So I would say to your audience, if you want to get exposure to that hot space, then BlinkLab is the absolute perfect space for that because you're investing in AI.
Yeah, no, I mean, I even saw it recently, an Apple ad with the watch talking about its detection for heart conditions. And there's clearly this trend towards these companies that, everyone's got a digital watch or a Whoop or whatever to diagnose things. And
or an iPhone.
Or an iPhone. And that's where the next realm is coming into.
Smartphone.
Yeah, we can't say brand agnostic. And from a medical professional point of view, we were saying at the beginning, your dad's a doctorate and, has been quite interested in some of the adventures that you've done. I mean, how are you finding their perspective and almost how they're wanting to engage with this upcoming digital technology? Because we know doctors, they study for years and some of them are almost sort of stuck in their ways in some regards. How are they finding this sort of new age of digital health coming in as a thing they need to almost upskill themselves in?
Well, what's interesting, you point out that because, yes, there is a reticence by medical doctors to adopt new technology. Absolutely, because they're trained and they're trained to use their brains, and the idea that some machine could potentially do a better job, I mean, there's always going to be a resistance factor. But what's interesting is not only just in, say, ResApp previously, but also now in BlinkLab, the sheer number of medical doctors that are investing in this company, it's quite phenomenal. So I like that. I mean, my own father is invested in it too. But there are many medical doctors investing in it because maybe they're early adopters within their medical field. But there's something else as well. I'm going to ask you this question.
Oh, okay.
What is the hottest subject in healthcare in Australia today?
Oh, it's the mental health side of things. Is
disabilities?
Yes.
And when I say that, I mean NDIS, right? It's always in the news. And it's because we're spending as a society.
And the budget is getting bigger and bigger.
The budget just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, what is the single biggest expenditure within NDIS? In what particular health concern?
Wouldn't know that one off the top of my head.
The answer is autism in children. It's about a third of the entire NDIS budget is spent on diagnosing and treating children with autism.
Yeah, I wouldn't have picked that.
No, that's in all the press. It was even on the front page of today's Australian newspaper, albeit that this thing won't come out until after that. But that is the hot subject. And I'm thinking, wow, timing-wise, you've got this AI technology, which is listing on the ASX. It would have already listed, I assume, when this comes out. Plus, it's in the space of autism, which is the single biggest expenditure within NDIS. And that's just in Australia. I don't know the stats in
the
respect
US.
to the US and others, but I'm sure it's comparable in the US and Europe as it is to Australia in terms of the expenditure involved in it. And one of the subjects within NDIS is not just the cost, but there's also a sense of some waste spending within that. So again, coming back to my earlier point, if you can diagnose children with autism at a younger age, then you can substantially increase the efficacy in their treatment because you're getting
diagnosing it earlier.
Diagnose anybody with anything earlier, and no matter what medical illness they would have, you get a better clinical outcome if you get them early, and that is what BlinkLab is all about.
And we talked at the beginning, you said the team and your approach to it, but drilling down on the board and the people alongside this company structure, I mean, who else is alongside you as the chairman and more so the directors and just board members?
Well, I'm really impressed with the team that we've put together. I mean, first of all, Anton, I've worked with Anton before with the highest respect for him. He was actually on the board of Oz Biotech when I was chairman. And so that was a long time ago now. But I've known Anton for a very long time. He's very entrepreneurial like me, got a good head on his shoulders for opportunities. And then there's Hank. Hank's really the inventor of the technology. He's Dutch, based in Amsterdam. Now, he's the CEO of the company, but he will be joining the board. I think there's a whole thing about director ID numbers and things like that. So there's a bit of a wait there. But he will be the managing director. He's already the CEO. So he's not on the board yet, but he will. There's Dr. Richard Hopkins. I've also known Richard for many years, going back to when I was chair of Oz Biotech. He was also on my board back then. And he's a scientist and very knowledgeable and had public company experience like me. And then we've got Jane Morgan. Now, Jane appeals to me because she's in a similar space that I am in terms of investor relations and company promotion, and also because she's based in Sydney. And so having her in Sydney gives us that exposure over there. So I thought it's not just Perth-centric and Amsterdam-centric, it's also Sydney-centric. Yeah. And having that exposure. And of course, Jane's so tremendously connected amongst all the investors. I thought she would be a great idea to join the board, and thankfully she said yes.
So that rounds out the board there, and I mean, we've encapsulated a lot in this discussion, and I can imagine the work's only really just beginning. So over the next 12 months, if there's key milestones or events that investors should be aware about, what could some of those be over the next 12 months for BlinkLab?
Well, certainly there's some clinical studies that we've been conducting that have completed just now. So we're sort of already ahead of schedule in terms of news flow in what we're doing on that front. But the main one really to look out for will be the commencement of the FDA registration trial in the US. The question will be, which university hospitals have we signed up to do that?
Yeah.
We'll keep that.
Can't say that yet.
We'll
but
keep
you'll
that
find
powder
out.
dry.
Yeah.
Once they're actually been executed on those agreements, but that will be something certainly exciting. You want to see your company, particularly Australian company from Perth, I mean, to be partnering with prestigious organisations in North America, big university hospitals, it's not usual. I mean, ResApp did it, and that was great, but BlinkLab to be doing that would be tremendous. And then there's news, there's recruitment. How are you going on that recruitment? There's a lot of things that can go wrong in clinical trials. So how are things progressing? Are we meeting our milestones? And I think in the prospectus and also in the company presentation, it clearly articulates those milestones. So my advice to investors is really, and something that I always live by in a public company director, is do what you say you're going to do in the time frame you say you're going to do it in. That's how you build investor trust. That's how you build their confidence. And also be out there and tell what's the story. Yeah. So I've always been known to be proactive in doing like events like this, but also at conferences, presenting. I go to these conferences. I never know who I'm going to meet. But it's amazing who you do
always meet some new faces and new networks.
Absolutely, there. And there's been some very big clients, or should I say investors, who've come on board in my company simply by being proactive, telling your story, and doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. If you do those things, then that's my treat
Recipe
to
for
success.
Yeah. So then following the company, of course, in these days, everyone's got social profiles and, of course, there's the ASX listed announcements. I mean, how can people stay in contact with the company and potentially ask questions or keep an eye on all these updates that are going to be flooding through over the next course of 12 months?
Well, I've always made a point to put my personal cell phone number on every announcement in every company. So my number's out there, and I get shareholders that ring me, and I love talking with them. As you can tell just from this conversation, I like talking about BlinkLab. It's exciting, and I like to share, what's going on. So shareholders can always ask me, obviously questions within reason. I can't, but what I can disclose, I'm always happy to do so. So you've just got to be out there and communicate, and so we'll communicate with our announcements, but also we'll have contact numbers on those announcements so that the key people can be contactable. Also from Hank, he's actually based in Amsterdam, but he's also based in New Jersey at Princeton, where he did his PhD and did his formative work in this company. So we'll get Hank to Australia at least 4 or 5 times a year, I expect. And I think Hank and I work really well together. I mean, you could probably tell that I'm no scientist. So there are things that I'm capable of answering and things that I'm not. Particularly when I'm talking to doctors, I really get nervous when I'm talking to doctors because they can run rings around me. I only know what I know. But having Hank with me is so good because he's a scientist himself, and he's very knowledgeable. So I'm actually looking forward to Hank getting here, and I think not far after the listing, and he and I will do a road show, and we'll go to Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, and
speak with everyone that wants to hear the story.
Get out there and tell this exciting story.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, the origins of the tech, and again, as we said, the progression of AI and digital health is it's right time, right place, which is just so good. And it's going to be an exciting period of time, this year, but even into the next handful of years. And I'm excited to see what happens with BlinkLab.
Can I mention one more thing?
Yeah, of course. Go for it.
Well, it's interesting. I've got a new theory, and that is being from Perth as we are.
Well, it's not mining for one, which is...
It's not mining, but this is a mining town. So I've got this new saying, which is, when metals are looking dull, biotech shines brightest. And it's because right now... mining is not that hot, but the investors, the stockbrokers, they know mining, they know metals, and they invest in them, and their clients invest in them. But I think what's going on right now is that we're seeing this downplay in lithium, iron ore, cobalt, copper. These are new explorer companies that are all chasing money, but when the brokers put it out to their clients, including me, I might add, I'm like,
not much interest.
Yeah, I don't think so. The last one you put me into didn't do very well, and that sort of thing, right? So when you've got something that's really topical and a huge market opportunity like a BlinkLab, I think that was probably the reason why
such a successful raise.
That's right. There was such a successful raise. So I think that the time is absolutely right for a BlinkLab to come along and hopefully go and kick the goals that we're intending to kick.
I agree. It's going to be exciting. The 4th of April will be a few days live by the time this goes out. But yeah, this is just a brief insight into it. And I encourage everyone to reach out to yourself and pick your brain, and also the website. But yeah, thank you so much, Brian, for speaking on the show today.
I appreciate you having me.
Thanks for listening to the Marketable podcast. Please remember that the topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial advice. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, share, and follow. You can follow The Marketable on all our socials and keep up to date with global market insights.